good morning, everyone, or everyone, good afternoon, Middle Easterns and Europeans, Africans, participant, and good morning to those in the US. And a special thank you to John Carson, our speaker, that joined us today from Australia, which is right now 11 p.m. at night. Welcome to the Middle East Weapon of Mass Destruction Free Zone launch event. John Carson of John Carson Report, Nuclear Verification in the Middle East, Weapon of Mass Destruction Free Zone, Lesson Learned from Past Verification Cases and Other Precedents. The report is now available online, and our very capable event producer, Letitia, will post the link of the report if you have not received it yet in the invitation. To those of you that are not familiar with our program and project at UNIDIR, it was launched in October 2019 with a very generous support and funding from the European Union. The project aims to fill research gap on the evolution of the zone, build capacity, develop new ideas, and foster dialogue. If you missed our latest document depository and online comprehensive resource hub on the evolution of the zone, the collection includes over 400 documents from open source and private collections that two of our project members, Tumisha Bino and Tom Hickey, curated. It's available online, and Letitia is also going to put it on the chat box, a link to that so you can access it. I encourage you to visit the depository, as there are several documents that it's the first time that have been published. Now, before I turn the floor to John, several housekeeping items. If you have not noticed yet, we are recorded, so just be clear that the event is going to be on the record. One of the few positive aspects of the global pandemic is our ability to bring many people together. And since we have many participants and people that were interested, we had to opt to webinar format on Zoom, which meant that you will be able to see and hear John and I only. Your video and mics will be muted or unmuted already. But when you will be, if you want to ask a question, there are two ways to do it. First one is to ask in the Q&A. You can ask to take the floor, or you can ask the question itself. If you want to take the floor and be seen on video and be heard, we will be able to do that. So if it's your turn to ask a question, I will call your name, and then you will be able to turn on your mic and your video. We are very delighted to have many people in the region, from the region right now participate, as well as from the diplomatic community, from communities from Geneva, New York, and Vienna. If you will have specific technical questions in the chat box, also Letitia will put her contact information. So you will be able to check with her if there is any specific topics that you need help with. Please note that beside of the event is on the record, we have also a couple of journalists on the line, so just be cognizant of that. With that, let me present our speaker and report author, John Carson. John is an independent consultant on nuclear safeguards, disarmament, and arms control and nuclear governance. He currently serves as a non-resident senior fellow at the Vienna Center for Disarmament and Non Proliferation, a member of the Asia Pacific Leadership Network, a member of the International Advisory Council of International Luxembourg Forum, and counselor at the Nuclear Threat Initiative. John was an official in the Australian government, serving as the Director General of the Australian Safeguard and Non Proliferation Office. He also chaired the Iaea Standing Advisory Group of Safeguard Implementation, SAGSI. He was alternate governor for Australia at the Iaea Board of Government and founding chair of the Asia Pacific Safeguard Network. As such, I could not have been more pleased that John agreed to write this paper and report. And with that, John, I will turn the screen of floor to you. And can you give us a little bit some general remarks about your study and your key finding?
Thank you very much, Ken. And hello, everybody. I'm delighted to see so many old friends and colleagues in the list of participants. This subject, if I could only move my slide, This subject has been an active one for almost 60 years. Certainly something that I've been working on and off for over 20 years. The lack of progress is frustrating and alarming. The lack of progress certainly doesn't indicate that the problems are going away. Quite the opposite. The risks are increasing, and I think we're at a crucial point at the moment where there is the opportunity for progress because of changes in Washington and elsewhere, and it's important that we don't let this opportunity pass. Previous proposals have failed because of the many political challenges, and I think there's been a lot of focus on those which have led to no result. And I firmly believe that instead we can make progress by focusing on technical aspects. How could we make such a zone work in practice? Specifically, how do we ensure that verification is effective? I believe a study by regional experts on this question, an objective study by experts, could enhance common understanding, build mutual confidence, and create a more constructive atmosphere in which the political decisions can be taken in due course. So my key messages for a start, it is possible to create a WMD-free zone in such a way as would serve the national interest of all the participants, of all the Middle East states. This would require that each state is prepared to analyse its interests dispassionately. It's not productive to think in political terms. It's not productive to think in terms of preserving rights, avoiding restrictions. Rather, each state should ask itself, what would it like to see apply in other states, particularly those that it considers a threat to its national security? And the key point here is whatever the answer is that a state comes up with, whatever measures it would like to see in other states, these have to be reciprocal. That once a state works out that it would like to see X, Y, and Z in another state, it must understand that the other state obviously would want to see the same thing in return. The greatest challenge for this zone will be nuclear latency, a term which means the development of capabilities that could be used for producing nuclear weapons, specifically uranium enrichment and reprocessing. As I discussed in the paper, there is no system of verification that can guarantee timely warning if these capabilities are misused. The breakout times can be simply too rapid for effective international response. And finally, I note that this paper focuses only on the nuclear aspects, but obviously in looking at a WMD zone more generally, it's necessary to look at the other weapons types and also delivery systems, and to look at all of these things in the broader regional political and security context. Finally, in my introductory remarks, I'll just touch briefly on delineating the zone. There's no general agreed definition of the Middle East region and what should be included in a zone. The paper has followed the working definition from the 1990 UN Secretary General study, namely the 22 members of the Arab League plus Iran and Israel. But as I note in the paper, it's also necessary to consider how Turkey should be engaged with the zone, whether as a member or in some other way, because Turkey is also of considerable strategic significance from the perspective of the other zone participants. And I'll finish my introductory messages there.
Thank you, John. And I think there are several already some thought-provoking or framing the issue in a different way that I think what we thought about it so far in the sense of reciprocal as well as what you will want to see in others as the basis of the prohibition or the restriction. So if you can actually elaborate a little bit more exactly about that, what do you think should be the main prohibitions and complementary measure or restriction in the zone?
Thank you, Chen. Clearly, the most important part of a system of verification is to decide what is it that we want to verify. And this requires us to define what are the prohibitions and the obligations that would apply in the zone. And part of thinking about that is to consider, well, what applies already and what will be new. If we look at existing prohibitions and obligations, which leads us to look at existing treaties, we can see that all potential participants in the zone, except Israel, are non-nuclear weapon states under the NPT. So the NPT has almost universal application. Almost half the potential parties are also parties to the African Nuclear Weapons-Free Zone, the Treaty of Pelindaba, and over half the participants have ratified the CTBT, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. So existing prohibitions and obligations include the renunciation of nuclear weapons, which is covered by the NPT plus Pelindaba Treaty. Nuclear energy is to be used for exclusively peaceful purposes. Again, that's NPT plus Pelindaba. No stationing of nuclear weapons is permitted. That applies in the Pelindaba Treaty area. No testing of nuclear weapons or nuclear explosive devices. That's Pelindaba plus the CDBT. No attacks on nuclear facilities is a provision in Pelindaba. And Pelindaba has provisions on how to eliminate nuclear weapons that might be held within the zone. And clearly that's of interest here. What additional prohibitions and obligations do we need? I've already mentioned the problem of nuclear latency. So one of the things that has to be looked at very seriously is the constraints on dual-use technologies, enrichment and reprocessing, and also the inventories of relevant materials. We have some guidance in this area from the terms of the JCPOA. And the other aspect that needs to be looked at is consideration of potential weaponization activities. And again, the JCPOA can provide some guidance for wider application. Also, it's necessary to look at the Iaea Safeguards additional protocol, which I'll discuss in the next part of this discussion, and in addition to make the CDBT binding on all participants. Thank you, Chen.
Thank you, John. And I think that's really interesting in the aspect that there are already existing prohibition, that the assumption is that the zone will have to build upon and take into account and for sure not contradict as the list. So if you spoke about the prohibition and restriction, what are the existing or desirable verification mechanism that actually will be relevant to the zone to be able to verify those prohibition and restrictions?
Today, all nuclear activities in the region, except in Israel, are subject to Iaea safeguards, what are termed comprehensive safeguards, or used to be known as full scope safeguards, and namely that there is an obligation of each state to place all its nuclear activities under Iaea Safeguards. In addition, the CDBT International Monitoring System applies. Although the CDBT is not yet in force, the monitoring system has been brought into operation on a provisional basis, and signatories to the treaty are bound not to act in a way that's inconsistent with the treaty. So CTBT provisions also apply through the region. Just to talk very briefly of Iaea Safeguards, the objectives are to provide a high probability of detection in order that there be timely warning of misuse, to deter violations through the risk of detection. And if you put these two elements together, I'd argue that ideally compliance is based on assurance rather than deterrence. In other words, the strength of Iaea Safeguards is not so much that they're effective enough to capture any violation, which obviously we hope they are, but because parties are confident of the performance of other parties through verification, they don't have the motivation to violate, and therefore deterrence shouldn't really be required. All parties would have a strong interest to comply with their obligations, and they have the confidence that others are doing that themselves. The IEA has emphasised that assurance, particularly on the absence of undeclared nuclear material and activities, requires both the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement and the additional protocol. And I argue strongly that the zone cannot provide effective verification without the additional protocol. The additional protocol and also the CDBT should be obligatory in the zone, and this is made clear in the most recent nuclear weapons zone treaty, the Central Asian Zone, the Treaty of Semipalatinsk. Is the additional protocol sufficient? As I've discussed, the IEA says the additional protocol is essential, but something to be considered in the zone is, do we need more? One thing that's a peculiarity of IEA Safeguards is the issue of allowing inspectors right of access at any time to all relevant places, documents and personnel. The IEA statute provides for that, but for some reason, current safeguards agreements don't spell that out. Another area that needs to be looked at is the monitoring of sensitive manufacturing and sensitive imports, and the JCPOA gives us some directions in that way. And elaboration of measures for dual use activities and items of possible weaponization application. And again, the JCPOA is important, particularly the responsibilities entrusted to the Joint Commission in that document. Limits on proliferation sensitive technologies and materials, which I've touched on. Mutual inspections, and I'll have more to say about that, but clearly mutual inspections could be extremely important in this zone. Challenge inspections, this is the possibility of inspection being initiated by a party rather than having to wait for the IEA or other verification entity to launch an inspection. And consideration has to be given to what kind of complementary measures could be important. Confidence building measures, transparency measures, and so on. Who should conduct verification? That's a major issue. Clearly, the IEA has an independent responsibility. for safeguards in accordance with safeguards agreements. This is a legal requirement, so no other entity can take the place of the IAEA, where the IAEA has responsibility. And there's an international expectation, in fact, that the IAEA will carry out these sort of functions. This provides international confidence. However, it seems clear that there is a role to play in the zone by a regional system incorporating mutual inspections. This can be extremely important for confidence building. And we have two precedents for this. We have ABAC, the Argentine-Brazil accountancy control system, or we have the Euratom model, the European Safeguards Agency, or we can have a combination of these, and I discussed this at some length in the paper. ABAC emphasises mutual inspections conducted in cooperation with the IAEA. Euratom is different. It's supranational, so it takes the place of national authorities. There are some advantages in that approach, and Euratom operates on a partnership basis with the IAEA, with a job sharing principle for inspections. And I think this is a fairly important issue to work through in developing a model for the Middle East zone.
Thank you. And I'm sure there will be many questions about how that can actually be operationalized and what are the implications, both legal as well as organizational and other aspects. If you spoke about the verification of the prohibition and transparency measure, but what about verification on disarmament and how that should be or could be addressed within the zone?
This clearly, in the context of this zone, is a question relating to Israel, which is outside the comprehensive safeguards system and which is generally believed to have nuclear weapons. There are two basic approaches. One would be to exclude Israel unless or until it accepts comprehensive safeguards. And the other approach would be to include Israel under a phased approach in which verification obligations and activities would be introduced and expanded progressively. The phased approach requires agreement on what these phases are and the time frame. What are the progressive steps and what are the verification activities? And I discussed this at some length in the paper. The first step is likely to be a fissile material cutoff, no further production of fissile material and verification of that fact. A key question is whether nuclear weapons dismantlement would be verified, or only there would be verification as fissile material is transferred into safeguards. And the South African precedent, which I discuss, points in that direction. A phased approach is likely to take an extended period, and I suggest the progress would be based on milestones rather than specific dates. I can't see that it's realistic to apply specific dates at this stage in the process. Now, this might not seem very attractive to a number of other states in the area, in the zone, but I think it's important that they realise that stopping further nuclear proliferation provides immediate benefit to all parties. In other words, if there's agreement to a zone that effectively counters proliferation by those currently without nuclear weapons, this is a substantial benefit to all parties. And it is also a condition necessary for achieving the full inclusion of Israel, because Israel is not going to disarm unless it's totally confident that it won't face nuclear threats in the future. So I think this is something that needs to be thought through very dispassionately and carefully. There's no point taking an in-principle position and saying, if Israel doesn't do this, we won't do so-and-so. It's necessary to look beyond that and think in terms of, well, where is there mutual advantage to all parties? And I'll take the opportunity now to wrap up my presentation. My conclusions are that there's no doubt that a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East can play a vital role in reducing tensions and in reducing the motivation to proliferate, but only if all parties are fully confident that the zone commitments are being honoured, and that's where effective verification is so essential. I suggest that the next step would be to establish a study by regional experts with assistance as may be required from outside to examine the technical and the practical aspects. It's only once there is a good understanding of how we can make this work that it's then possible to get sensible political decisions to commit to doing the various steps. Meanwhile, while such a technical study is underway, there are supporting steps states can and should take, concluding additional protocols and engaging proactively with Iaea Safeguards is an obvious thing. Refraining from actions that will impact negatively on prospects for the zone. And in a broader sense, to look at reviving the kind of discussions that have been held in the past on regional security structures, because obviously, although we can make progress in the development of a verification system for nuclear activities, this is all taking part in a much broader context, which has to also feed into the way this has progressed. I'm afraid I'm always an optimist, and as I said at the outset, I think we have a unique moment in time where it would be possible to actually bypass some of the obstacles we've had in the past in this area and to set up a process which can lead towards a positive outcome. On that note, I'll finish. Thank you, Ken.
I can think about at least 4 or 5 questions that I have that I would like to ask you, but given the fact that we have so many participants as well as several people that already expressed their interest to ask questions, I will turn the floor to some of our participants for asking questions, and then I might ask a couple of them myself. As noted, when I'm giving you the floor and asking your name, you will be able to be seen and be heard. And I see Ambassador Idris from Egypt is already prepared to ask his question. Ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chen, and good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you very much. 11 o'clock p.m. at Australia, 7 a.m. from New York. Greetings, and really thank you for your effort and your presentation. It's really very valuable, especially that we are already embarking, as you know, on this attempt to move toward the WMD zone in the Middle East through the first session which we had about the conference, Middle East conference. Of course, we are anticipating the second round to take place. The first one was encouraging and positive, alleviated lots of concerns and lots of worries, and we hope that the second one can build on it. Really, I appreciate the direction and the spirit you injected in the paper. I agree with you that lack of progress is both frustrating and alarming, and this is very true and very valid. And that and the issue has both the political and technical aspects, and that we need to move beyond mere perception of self-interest in order to have some sort of reciprocal arrangements. And of course, in the Middle East, we are aiming not only for nuclear free zone, but WMD free zone. And the point also that we have lots of build-up. The build-up is very important here. We're not starting from scratch, but we're building on experience of other zones in the region and the other continents. You refer to Blindaba, you refer to, of course, lots of lessons to be drawn from the South African experience. The issue about the honoring commitments is definitely so important. And I think that we need to get beyond this gap between the political and the technical aspect. Some are very much putting the political aspect as a precondition. Some are highlighting the complexity of the technical aspect. And I think there is importance to have synergy between both here and to fill the gap or bind the gap between overemphasizing on the political aspect and also overemphasizing on the technical aspect, and trying to draw on the experience of the other region, the South Africa, the ex-Soviet republics. Lots of lessons to be drawn here. And maybe my question would be how to, what is the more relevant from these other experiences? Because one of the attempts we are trying to do on the conference on the Middle East is to draw on the lessons learned from other experiences, how we can make this build up in order to move towards a more practical way forward. And hopefully that sometime not far, we can say that this lack of progress is witnessing change, and that this frustration and alarm is going another way. We hope so. But really appreciate your effort. And really, my question would be this: how to make this bridge this gap between the political and technical aspect, and how to synergize both in a positive manner, and how also to draw what will be more relevant from the experiences of the other zones in the world, success stories in the world. Thank you very much again, and hopefully we are moving on a positive way. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I will let John elaborate, but I will also point you to the report itself. And the report is very elaborate about the lesson learned and some of the ideas of what, both from other zones as well as other case studies that have been the Iaea and other verification and inspection challenges. But I will turn, John, if you want to elaborate both about the experiences of other nuclear weapon-free zones, as well as some of the case studies that you look at, both on the regional aspects, like Habak and Euratom, or some of the other case studies, specific ones that the IAEA learn from and evolve their own safeguards verification system.
Thank you. I'll be very brief, because otherwise I could talk all night on on the rather complex issues. But I'd just make the following points. First, that the current IAEA system, with the additional protocol as an essential aspect, developed in response to major safeguards violations in the past. 4 of the 6 non-compliance cases occurred in this zone, so that, or the area that would be the zone. So that clearly points to there being a problem that has to be addressed by verification that works. So we need to look at what's in the safeguard system with the additional protocol. Why was that necessary, and what we need to do beyond, and particularly looking at things that were negotiated into the JCPOA. And the other angle here is to look at what's done in other zones specifically, and that's where both ABAC and Euratom are very important. And I think mutual inspections of one form or another are going to be a major aspect of the Middle East zone, and whoever is studying these issues needs to ensure that they get very full briefing from both ABAC and from Euratom experts to think through what's the best combination that can be drawn from those experiences. And I think I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Thank you, John. I have next Noah.
Yes, thank you, Ken, and good to see you. Good to see you, John, as well. I'm looking forward to taking a deep dive into the paper. I have a question about the legalities of how this might work. Of course, as you indicate in what I have read, there would have to be sort of an overarching legal structure to the nuclear weapons-free zone, but it's my suspicion that in the IAEA's involvement in verification, there would have to be sort of a verification agreement concluded with the IAEA by the states parties to the zone. My question to you is, to what extent would the negotiation of this legal agreement with the IAEA cause significant further controversies, difficulties in making the zone actionable? If you recall back to the Trilateral Initiative, there were 9 drafts of this verification agreement between the US, Russia, and the IAEA into how to verify what would have been the agreement if ever it had sort of actualized. Given all of the political tensions in the region, do you think that this would be another sort of, first we get to the nuclear weapon-free part of the zone, and then another whole saga of legal challenges for the IAEA's involvement? And what challenges do you see in this regard?
Thank you, Noah. Personally, I don't think the legal challenges are very major. Much of what would have to be done in the zone is already covered by the Iaea Safeguards system. To the extent that more would have to be done on the non-proliferation side, we have ideas from the JCPOA that can be looked at. So that work has been done in a way. And I don't really see that it would be a major issue to write that into legal language. I think we've pointed to is on the disarmament side, the elimination of nuclear weapons side. That's new territory. But we have yet to talk through how would that work. If it involves verification of dismantlement of nuclear weapons, then that's certainly very new and would have to be, the steps would have to be negotiated. But an alternative approach is that it simply involves verification of quantities of nuclear material that are brought forward and submitted to safeguards at particular intervals. And in that case, that's standard safeguards, including all the investigation that would have to be carried out to ensure that there is no undeclared material, looking at production records from nuclear facilities, looking at what's called nuclear archaeology, the supporting evidence for records, the wastes and so on. These are all standard safeguards activities that have been done in many cases, South Africa being a perfect example. And this did not require the negotiation of major new agreements. It's something that's done by standard IAEA practice. So I don't think that the legal negotiation aspect is really a major challenge or delaying factor. What would be more complicated maybe is documenting a regional system and working out who does what. How do you ensure that inspections are mutual, that you have a way of allocating inspectors so that they go to the states that they would like to go to, and so on. I think there's a fair amount of work in that. And again, I don't think it's so much a legal challenge, but probably more a procedural administrative one, but quite a lot of work to be done. But then the development of that would be gradual. It's not going to happen overnight. Obviously, it's something that would take some years to come into full operation.
Thank you, John. Sonia, I think you're next. Would you like to ask the question in person?
Thank you very much, and hello to everybody. Thank you, John. It is a great pleasure seeing you again after so many years.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts. An excellent presentation. I was just wondering whether, in terms of taking into account the experience of other nuclear weapons-free zones, Tlatelolco could be a good basis to think about. But of course, the difference would be that in this case, it was a region of peace, and there was no nuclear weapon state in that region. Maybe the important part of it would be what we call the negative assurances. That means what would be the commitments of the nuclear weapon states not to threat, not to attack a weapon-free zone. And I would like to see, about your thinking on that. The other point that I try to make is about the states that in the Middle East are interested in pursuing nuclear energy for electricity. And I also like to hear about your thinking on that, because for me, it's a unique opportunity to create a safeguards culture, security, and safety. And maybe that, and in terms of the technical expert dialogue that you have mentioned, could be also good as an exercise of engaging the experts in these matters. And finally, again, I think that you have a very good point in terms of establishing a kind of regional mechanism in which mutual inspections or challenge inspections or things like that could be agreed among the parties, the interested parties, to verify compliance on the nuclear and the peaceful use of nuclear energy. And finally, as you have also mentioned with a couple of good ideas, the existence of a nuclear weapons state in the region is a challenge, and still there is a need for a political solution to that. Thank you, John. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Sonia. In my paper, I already talked about verification as a very specific group of issues. I haven't considered nuclear security assurances, but I agree with you that these will be essential. An important underpinning for the future zone will be guarantees by the P5, both negative security assurances, but also, I think, very positive assurances of P5 support for the objectives of the zone and for managing possible violations, which let's hope there won't be any. But I think it's essential that the P5 make it clear that they stand behind the zone and will do whatever is needed to make sure the zone works properly. On your question of nuclear energy, you are absolutely right as well that looking at development of nuclear energy on a regional basis is a way of fostering engagement and building confidence amongst states, and has economic benefits as well, obviously, in ensuring optimum use of facilities. So this is obviously something that would have to be looked at. Where that impacts on the content of the zone is in the area of fuel making, and specifically enrichment and reprocessing. And as an alternative to establishing those activities in the zone and all the problems that that would present, international fuel assurances would be an important parallel aspect to the zone, so that countries embarking in nuclear energy programs have a total guarantee that they will get fuel as they need it.
Thank you, John. And just for everyone awareness where we're going next, I will read just a list of speakers that or participants that are going to ask additional questions, so just that you will know who is in line and who is next. So we will have Karim Hagag next, and then Arslan, Madi, Paul, Roman, Ayman, Bassem, and Noel. So Karim.
Thank you, Chen, and thank you, Mr. Carlson, for really a very detailed, thorough, and thought-provoking paper. I very much enjoyed reading it. I have two questions, if Chen will indulge me. The first is on this issue of latency, which I think you very correctly identified as a major challenge for the verification of the zone. Latency is a threshold issue. So what threshold should be applied as a standard in terms of the obligations of countries of the zone, and how should this be verified? And it seems in reading your paper, whenever this issue of latency is mentioned, you refer back to the JCPOA. And so I was wondering your thoughts on whether the JCPOA provides a new standard of verification that should be regionalized as the basis for verification of the zone. The second question has to do with Israel, and I found your discussion of the dismantlement issue, the disarmament and dismantlement, quite intriguing. And you pose these two different options of how Israel can relate to the zone. Whether it should come into the zone as a non-nuclear weapon state, or whether it should enter into the zone through a more phased approach. And I think the difference is clear between both approaches in terms of the potential political obligations of Israel. And presumably these would be conditional and reversible if Israel decides to enter the zone according to a phased approach, which I think might be problematic. But more importantly, I was wondering if you could elaborate whether just in terms of the technical process of verification, whether this process would be different for both approaches. I mean, presumably the verification of Israel's adherence to the zone would also be done in a phased manner. In other words, how would the verification process differ between both approaches in terms of Israel's adherence to the zone? And then this relates to the latency issue after disarmament. What threshold should Israel be obligated to observe after disarmament? And would that look any different than what the threshold would be for other members of the zone? Thank you.
Well, that's quite a collection of difficult questions, but let's tackle the Israel one. The obvious problem, if Israel doesn't join the zone until later, is will they join at all? The advantage in the phased approach is that it gets Israel into the zone and accepting commitments. And I think that's something that needs to be thought through in the way the terms of the zone are negotiated, as to whether it's better to have Israel in and doing things progressively, or is there a danger that if you say you can't join until you're a non-weapon state, whether there's some risks in that at the end of the day, Israel might say, okay, we can see the zone's working perfectly now with respect to everybody else, so we can get the benefit of that, and maybe we won't disarm after all. On the question, how would verification differ? I think it's clear that if there was a progressive approach, verification would proceed. Some verification would proceed on a step-by-step basis. There would be some other forms of verification that would be common to both approaches, because what the verification agency, the IAEA or whoever, would have to do would be to look at the full nuclear history in Israel, what has ever been produced, as we can see from the evidence that would be available, how much has been produced, and compare that with how much is transferred into safeguards on the approach that Israel doesn't join until it's disarmed. The transfer to safeguards would happen at the end, and it would be a transfer of everything in one go, as happened with South Africa. And then a work of some decades to go backwards for the verifiers and to satisfy themselves that nothing has been held back. If it's a progressive approach, then those two things would sort of go in parallel. You get the verification of installments as they're being brought under safeguards, but you'd also get more and more of the historical work proceeding in parallel, so that when we get to the end point, we can still reach the same conclusion that everything has been declared, nothing has been held back. I think the main point out of all of that is it's going to be a lengthy process, however it's done, and it's unrealistic to expect otherwise. In South Africa, it took something like, well, I guess if you, on one interpretation, you'd say it took 25 years. But certainly it took the best part of 10 years to reach a high level of confidence. And it's going to be a lengthy process. But if there's a commitment by Israel to join a zone, if they're confident that it's working, then I think that would be a tremendous outcome to achieve. On your first question, what's the threshold for latency? I think the threshold for latency is pretty low. The JCPOA sets out a standard which requires that a state should not be able to produce enough fissile material for a warhead in less than 12 months. That's not a bad standard, but the trouble is that's a very low level of enrichment activity. It's just a laboratory R&D scale. And my view is if states are only going to be doing that kind of level of activity, what's the point? That it would be better for everyone if they simply terminated that work. On the other hand, if they're going to be free to expand into anything significantly larger than that, then the latency problem is there straight away. You have a challenge to verification effectiveness quite early on in an enrichment program. You don't need a commercial scale plant. Something quite small would still be capable of either being used for nuclear weapons or for masking a parallel program that's being used for nuclear weapons. So I really do think it's necessary to bite the bullet on this one and say enrichment activities are incompatible with a nuclear weapon-free zone unless they're conducted in some sort of multinational basis. So there's a challenge to be thought through. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I think the point you're making are very important in the sense of the Middle East is a little bit more, or is more complex than other regions, and how those can be addressed in a way that all countries in the region are feel comfortable and confident that the zone is indeed effective and verifiable. I have many more people that are interested to ask questions. And if we want to let John go to sleep before 1 o'clock his time, we will try to have questions relatively short and answer respectively. So Arslan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hello, Han. Hello, John. Thank you very much for the presentation. I have just one question. You pointed out that there is a lack of progress. How, in your view, in 2 or 3 points, how do you think that this could be bridged, to bridge the lack of progress, or also to raise awareness and deeply or deep the confidence and trust among the countries? The second question is how to promote this culture of safety, security, and safeguard. Could we think about a science diplomacy that could help the normal diplomacy or soft diplomacy? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arslan. I will actually try, John, if I might take 2 at a time, sure. That might, just to make sure that everyone will be able to ask their questions. So I have Mahdi after that.
Yes. Hello, do you hear me?
Yes, yes, hello.
Yeah, thank you, John. Thank you for providing this very informative presentation. It's quite very interesting. Of course, you are well aware that there are a lot of technical, political, and legal aspects on these very complex issues. You raised 2 specific issues: nuclear latency, and also the issue of the possibility to exclude Israel for nuclear disarmament before creating such a zone. And this is, of course, we tried to address namely on the verification issues and focusing on technical matters. But it is quite clear that we are not working in the vacancy and in isolation. There is almost 15 years try and legal basis to create some foundations for such a nuclear weapon-free zone. And one of the main one is that any countries that are going to, or any party going to join to such a zone would commit not to possess, acquire, test, manufacture, or use any nuclear weapon, as provided for in the 1995 MP Review Conference, Middle East Resolution. And it's 25 years after that, there is no progress in this respect. And proposing these 2 ideas of nuclear latency, that means that creating the nuclear enrichment-free zone rather than a nuclear weapon-free zone. And in the same time, proposing the possibility for excluding Israel from nuclear disarmament before joining to the regions is completely deviating us from the main purpose of creating such a zone. Because at the moment, all of the countries in the regions, none of them has a nuclear weapon. And all of their nuclear activities are under the comprehensive safeguards. So what is the point to creating a zone for the countries that does not have any nuclear weapons and excluding a party that possesses nuclear weapons from any disarmament commitment? Thank you.
Yeah. And you going to ask?
I think if you don't mind answering those two, and then we will take two by two.
Okay. Well, let's start with the last one, and let me be very clear. I'm certainly not suggesting excluding Israel. Definitely not. What I've suggested is the way that Israel would be brought into this is something that has to be worked through by the parties. And I think an important part of all of that is the technical study that would show how a zone can be effective. I think that's an important part of establishing confidence at a political level amongst all the parties, prospective parties, including Israel, that if Israel can see that a zone can meet its objectives, then Israel could be prepared to commit to such a zone. And certainly the opposite is true. If Israel feels the zone will not be effective, then why would they join it? So I think in a way I'm answering also Aslan's question of how to build confidence in this process. I think an expert study into the practicalities of effective verification is an important part of building political confidence that would enable governments to commit to such a zone. Governments from either side, both from the non-weapon states and from Israel. Turning to Aslan's questions, I really liked his idea of science diplomacy, and I think it is absolutely essential to foster dialogue by experts who can develop good ideas and persuade their political masters that the ideas are good ideas. I think if we always have discussions on points of principle, then there's always going to be a level of skepticism that it's hard to overcome. I think there's real value in doing something at a practical level, which we experts can then demonstrate to decision makers will meet national interest. And I think that is a more productive way to go than simply having discussions on points of principle where there will always be differences. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I have next Paul Ingram.
Thank you, Hen. John, I really welcome your study, and I really welcome UNIDIR's involvement in this. It's an exciting project, and I've no doubt that it has a good chance of having a positive impact on the stasis that you referred to. I really like this approach. It's very similar to the approach that we at the Middle East Treaty Organization are taking, that UNIDIR people, including Hen, have been involved in very generously. It's an approach around looking at the idea of issues like verification in principle from a position of what would actually work, rather than getting very quickly bogged down in the weeds of politics, will, and all the rest of it. I'm still left at the end of all this with a nagging feeling that putting out this model that you have outlined in a very constructive way will simply create awareness of the difference in starting point of the different actors, And I wonder, I guess my question is there some middle ground here in looking at your step-by-step process, which personally I think is the only likely outcome that we're going to have, a step-by-step process towards a zone. Is there any mileage from thinking about the interface between verification in principle, what is going to work, and the politics involved, given the massively different starting point is not constrained by international agreements, and other countries are dealing with this from a position of principle and fairness? In other words, how do we articulate the national interest on both those sides to taking commitments step by step in a process that involves confidence building and trust building over time? Thank you, Hen.
I will turn to Ayman. Ayman Khalil.
Hi, Chen. I would like to thank the speaker, Mr. Carlson, for his elaborate paper, and I am deeply reminded by Mr. Gareth Evans, who also happens to be an Australian. I spent extensive effort and time and energy on this WMD-Free Zone concept in the Middle East. Allow me, sir, to have quick points for your kind attention. You've mentioned that including Israel into the process might be through a phased approach, and I wonder if you have consulted Israelis on this. I'm not sure if Israelis would be totally open for such an approach, and I would like to share our experience. I am affiliated, of course, to a Jordanian agency, and many years ago, with the start of the peace process, and Jordan happens to be one of the leading countries when it comes to forging peace with Israel. We've actually proposed sharing samples or exchanging samples, environmental samples from the peripheries, from the surroundings of nuclear facilities, both in Jordan and Israel. And this was totally refused by the Israeli side. So the question of a phased approach is a catchy proposal, yet I'm not sure to what extent it would be practical, more specifically within the Israelis themselves. And second point is, so to what extent you think that the creation of a zone could fit while an existing occupation is taking place on the ground? You have successfully looked at other models in various geographical regions, but there's one missing aspect, and that is this region is plagued with this acute and ongoing occupation. I'm not sure if you have taken this issue into your analysis. The third point is, you've mentioned that foregoing reprocessing and enrichment activities is key to this debate. And I would like to remind you that currently in the Middle East, a number of countries have expressed their willingness to go for enrichment, including my country, Jordan, including Saudi Arabia. Egypt is terminating its 123 agreement. Well, 123 agreement is coming to an end very soon, and it's very much looking forward for pursuing their enrichment activities. Hence, we believe that enrichment could be part of the answer, not an exclusive process given to some parties rather than others. And finally, Chen, I would like to thank you for this event. And quick question: is this paper on a commission basis, or is it solely representing the author? Thank you so much.
If I just may answer, it's John Carson paper that we commissioned. But John, if you want to address both Paul and Ayman's question.
Yeah, thank you, Chen. On the question of Israel's participation, first I'd like to clarify that a phased approach doesn't mean a step-by-step commitment. It means a commitment to take certain steps in a progression. But at the outset, there would be a commitment to the end point. I think otherwise it doesn't really have any meaning. So that if Israel came into the zone on a phased basis, at the outset they would have to agree that ultimately they would be in the same status as every other party, and what would have to be negotiated is, well, what are the steps that would lead to that outcome, and how would they be timed and how would they be verified? On the problem of how to interest Israel in the first place, I think it's fairly important to talk frankly with Israel, and I think the P5, one would hope, could be helpful in this, and make the point that if nothing changes, they won't have a monopoly on nuclear weapons capability in the zone forever. At some point, others will also be in that position, and the consequences for everybody's security, Israel's and the others, would be pretty dire. So I think there's, taking a long-term perspective, there is a definite advantage for Israel in securing a weapons-free zone, provided they're confident that it is effective, it works. Then this is a better outcome for them long-term than leaving things as they are today, where every so often they suddenly find that a neighbour has been dabbling in strategically threatening areas. So I think this is why I argue that all the participants must be prepared to look at this objectively and dispassionately, and to be able to have a realistic view of what their security interests really are in the longer term. What's the world they would like to be in, and how is it possible to achieve that? And a technical study is the important part of showing how it is possible to achieve a mutually beneficial outcome. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, John. And I think at the end of the day, that's the core of the issue, and the political aspects of those, and how you overcome the political difficulties of achieving the zone. I have Bassem next, and then I will ask several questions from the participants that asked to me to deliver their questions. So Bassem, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Carlson, for this very timely and thought-provoking paper. It is quite comprehensive, and it contains many elements that I do agree with, but also a few elements that I do disagree with, or at least have some conceptual difficulties with. I'll try to be very focused. My first point is that distinction between nuclear verification and nuclear disarmament verification. I think in many occasions we notice that this distinction is somewhat elusive or actually misleading. We believe that nuclear verification in itself is a verification of nuclear disarmament. The focus of all the existing instruments in the NPT, TPNW, existing nuclear weapon-free zones is on the fissile material. Even in the discussions on the FMCT or a possible FMCT, the crux of the matter is that you apply safeguards on the fissile material. Once you have that, then the weapon itself is no longer nuclear,
and its disposal or destruction is something that can be subject to, let's say, confidence building measures or something if necessary. But in the existing zones and other treaties, that was never an issue of concern to the extent that you create a whole body of verification for that, because it's very difficult from the technical point of view. And that also impacts the phased approach that you are addressing. I appreciate the options that you put there. It's going to be very valuable for our work and in the future discussions, but I think it needs to be understood from the beginning that this distinction needs to be put in the right context. The second concern is the overemphasis on the issue of latency or thresholds. I would argue that there are dozens of non-nuclear weapon states that do possess very advanced nuclear capabilities, that do possess a national fuel cycle capability. But once they are under safeguards, that is not a concern. And I have a difficulty with this concept that the Middle East is totally different than the rest of the world, that we are from a different planet. I think at the end of the day, with some leveling of the playing field, if you imagine a Middle East in which all states are subject to comprehensive safeguards and that the agency has issued a clean bill of health, that there are assurances that these activities are under safeguards, we are 95% of the way there. Most of the other technical complexities would be rather resolved. My third question is regarding your reference to the inclusion of Turkey one way or the other. I think in the context of the IEA and the relevant General Assembly resolutions, the geographical definition of the zone has already been established. Don't you think that, of course, Turkey is an important country, I'm not undermining that, but don't you think that the inclusion of Turkey in these discussions might create even further complexities given Turkey's membership in NATO and NATO's nuclear sharing policies or stationing obligations? To conclude, I would like to say again that there are many valuable inputs there that require a lot of attention and discussion. However, eventually the technical aspects of the issue of nuclear verification are not new. We're building, as many speakers said, on 5 decades of experience in the NPT, more than 6 decades in the IEA, several successful nuclear weapon-free zones. So once there is a political decision and a legal obligation by all states of the zone or the region, I think most of the technical issues will be automatically resolved, and that needs to be highlighted some way, that it's not an impossible task for the Middle East to have an effective nuclear verification regime. Thanks again.
Thank you, Bassem. And I might just add that we are working also on some of the political aspects. That's obviously outside of John's paper, but in other of our project deliverables and activities, we're definitely working on that, and we'll be very happy to share with you those products when we are ready. I have 2, let me tell you the list, and I think we're actually going to close it after that. So the list right now is, I'm going to ask 2 questions for Noel Stutz and on behalf of Ambassador Sultanay. Then we will have Osama Ali and Nabi Azadi and Sharon Dolev. I think that's it. And I actually, sorry, I will ask also Roman questions. So for Noel Stutz, in your paper, John, you look on South Africa example as in a positive light. Could you say something where South Africa may not be a good example, or where a negative lesson could be learned for progress on the Middle East weapon of mass destruction-free zone? So that's one question. Another questions or more comments by Ambassador Sultanay is the issue of reciprocity cannot apply to the Middle East due to unequal footing status of parties in the region. Mutual inspection also cannot be realistic as long as all are in the same status. South Africa declared its nuclear weapons. South Africa declared its possession, but Israel not yet. Not attacks was excellent as envisioned in Plain Daba. It could be considered in the Middle East with historical background. Therefore, both reciprocity and mutual inspection cannot be applied. And then with regard to Roman questions, I think it was, just a second. I think it was about what outside power can contribute or help with regard to the strengthening the region. So I will let you, John, address this few very simple questions.
Well, thank you, Ken. Very simple questions, as you say. First, let me talk about the latency problem again. And let me make it very clear, this is not a Middle East problem. It's not a problem that's limited to the Middle East. Fortunately, there are very few countries that are engaging in enrichment and much fewer in reprocessing. But it's an issue that any country that's working in this area is going to have to face at some time. I can see that it's going to be a major issue amongst the established weapons states as they disarm, once they start to take their obligations seriously and radically reduce their levels of nuclear weapons, then the operation of large-scale enrichment plants is going to be a major headache because of the breakout opportunities. So it's certainly not. This is not a discriminatory issue. It's an issue that's universal wherever these technologies are, as recognised by the nuclear suppliers guidelines, for instance, which emphasise that enrichment should be established on a multi-nation basis rather than an exclusively national basis. On the question of engaging Turkey, then I agree. It certainly would be complicated, and I think it's something for the parties to consider. And if the consensus is that Turkey doesn't have to be in the zone, then that's fine. But I think myself, it's an issue that will be on the minds of a number of the participants, and it's something that has to be thought through and probably discussed with Turkey. Were there any negative aspects from South Africa? I can't think of any, other than the fact that it was quite complex. One of the real difficulties in the South African case was that it was a very unusual technology, the enrichment process they had, and it involved a huge inventory of nuclear material. The throughput was enormous, and that created a major verification challenge in going back and building up the record of just how much material had there been and was it all properly accounted for. But I don't think there are any negative aspects otherwise. In fact, I'd regard South Africa as a pretty successful story, and particularly the attitude of the South Africans that IAEA inspectors could go anywhere, anytime, if they had an appropriate reason. I think that's the way verification should work. So I'd regard South Africa as a very positive example for a number of aspects. On the question of can mutual inspections exist if parties are unequal, then I'd say look at Euratom. Euratom isn't actually structured as mutual inspections in a procedural sense, but the end result is is that it's a supranational agency with authority across the entire membership, and the membership did include 2 weapon states, now 1 weapon state since Brexit, but certainly there's nothing in having participation by states of different status that impacts on the way inspections can be carried out. And I think I'll finish there. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you. So we have 3 concluding questions. Osama Ali.
Thank you, Madam, for giving me the floor. I thank Mr. Carlson for his presentation, and I have to admit that I didn't have enough time to study it because it has a very technical aspect that is interesting, actually. But I want to say that it's always the problem about establishing the WMD-free zone in the Middle East is always the implementation of whatever legal instruments is going to be achieved among all the parties of the states. And I have to say that the absence of the political will from Israel is the main obstacle to establish this zone, because all the legal references of establishing this zone is already existing since 1995. And we even have a Security Council resolution number 487 of 1981 asks Israel to put all its nuclear installments under the safeguard of the IAEA, but yet no implementation is taking place. And this is because the international community should play an important role in pushing Israel to implement all the legal references and to join the MBT and put all, as of course, to join the MBT as non-nuclear state and put all its nuclear facilities under the safeguard of the IAEA. And whatever we, and this might require that the international community maybe take a decision or at the level of the Security Council imposing sanctions, legally binding sanctions, in case Israel is not complying, then it should be subject to a strict sanction regime. I just want to mention that and thank you very much.
We can have Sharon first.
Thank you, Chen, and thank you, John, for such an amazing work. I'm from the Middle East Treaty Organization. We're in the middle of our work on the 4th draft treaty, and your work is going to be such a huge help to us. Thank you. I just wanted to make a comment on the question of Israel should disarm or should we work towards a WMD-free zone in the Middle East. And since I'm not an academic but a campaigner, I look at it as one goal, and Israel joining is a step in it. It's a massive, it's important, of course. But the decision, the 95 decision, and the 2010 decision, and the decision of 2018 to have the November conference on the zone, were always on the zone. There was no decision to have a conference on how to disarm Israel. If that was the conference, then sure. Now, do we all want Israel to be part of the zone? I think most of us here in this event at least do. We do want that. But is it possible if we continue with the same line, Israel should disarm? As a campaigner, I can say that we can do the same campaign again and again and again and achieve the same results as we achieved up till now. But if we create the zone, and if we work on the zone, and at all time remember that there's one state that we really want to see in the zone, and when we work towards the draft treaty, we're taking some of the concerns of this state because we want it in. while remembering that we are not talking about nuclear weapons only. We're talking about weapons of mass destruction, which makes it much more regionally thinking. If we'll continue to do that, then we might be able to create a zone with Israel in it. And the fact that Israel and the United States are not in the room right now shouldn't handicap us. On the other hand, it gives us an opportunity to move forward with whatever suggestion we have for a sustainable zone, hoping that Israel will join after rather than right now, when obviously Israel is not ready for a constructive conversation. But a constructive conversation should take place regardless. Thank you.
Thank you. I agree totally.
Okay, so I think by now we concluded. So John, I will let you sum up your answers, if you have any particular answers to the questions that were asked last, and then if not, we will do one more thing and then we'll conclude.
Thank you, Finn. I don't think I've got anything to add to what we've discussed before. An essential part of any kind of diplomacy or any kind of interaction is to be able to put yourself in the place of the person you're talking with and to try to understand issues from their perspective. And with regard to Israel, I think the first question I'd put to anyone is, well, what would you do if you're in their situation? Would you disarm immediately? Well, of course you wouldn't. You would. Your responsibility to your own country would be to understand, well, what are the guarantees that would apply if we did that? And the only realistic approach, I think, is to work through, well, what are the guarantees that would apply, including the verification aspect, which is at a very basic level. And obviously, as I mentioned before, there's also the engagement of the P5 and so on, a whole range of things. But to actually reach a common understanding of what the verification system would be, and to have all the parties able to understand, yes, if that is done properly, that will meet our security concerns. I think that's a big step, and some practical work of that kind is in my view, a necessary condition to getting the kind of political commitments that we're looking for. And I'll finish on that. And thank you for all the comments and questions. So I thought they were really thought-provoking and encouraging. Even the negative ones were encouraging.
Thank you, John. And I think that at the end of the day, that's exactly what we're trying to do, which is create a dialogue and create the ideas of what exists already, what is possible, and how to go there and how to get and implement the next steps. So with that, we want to gather some of your opinions about what John presented and how what will be the component of the verification of the zone. So if Letitia, if you will be able to share with us I assume it will be in the chat box, a link to a short question survey about what will be the component on the zone base. And it was important for us that first John will present and answer the questions, and then to get your opinion based on that, what will be the component on the zone. So we'll have a short survey here. We're going to use Mentimeter. If you're not familiar with that, in a second, you will see the link and you will see a question. So the first question is delineation of the zone. Which states you think should be included? The first one is based on the UN Secretary General report, the Arab League plus Iran and Israel. And the second option, the same combination, but including also Turkey. So please answer that, and then you will see the results. Okay, so it seems, I think, which is a little bit surprising to me, that more people that I expected, I would say, think that Turkey has some role to play in the zone, which is, I think, interesting. So going to the next question. The next question, in which additional prohibition other than those in the NPT and existing nuclear weapon-free zone do you think the zone should include, if any? Options are prohibition on uranium enrichment, limited enrichment, so permit enrichment under multilateral, multinational control, limited enrichment to, let's say, 5%, so up to a degree, prohibition on plutonium suspension and use, limitation on nuclear material inventory, so quantity and quality, limitation on sensitive manufacturing and import, similar to what we have right now in the JCPOA, and limitation on dual-use technology with potential weaponization applications, similar to what we have in the JCPOA. And we realize that those are a little bit, this is a more involved question, so we will let you read through the options. And the idea is really answering beyond the existing nuclear weapon-free zones prohibition and the NPT, what do you think should be the additional prohibitions? So based on what we see so far, just to let you know, so the majority of people think that limitation of dual-use technology with potential weaponization, as well as limitation on sensitive manufacturing and imports. So that's, I think, interesting two aspects that the JCPOA as a non-proliferation tool provided us. So going to the next question, what will be the strongest argument to get regional state to support each additional measure? So for example, one of the questions that I think were asked is that why the Middle East is unique and why we as people from the region should take from us additional measures that are not being taken by anyone else. So what do you think would be the strongest argument to get regional state to support such additional measures? And you can put a word or a sentence. So I see that there is already one brave person that said regional stability, that will achieve or enhance regional stability. So I think from what summarized some of the words and argument that I see so far, a lot of them speaking about security, enhanced security, many of them speaking about achieving peace or preventing conflict. Some speak about economic development, so that will achieve or enhance economic development. And I think those are the main ones that I see so far. Preventing arms race, preventing terrorism, better life for future for all. I see a lot of CBMs. We can move to the last question. So the last question, and when should entry into force take place? And you have several options. Not until all zone states ratify, not until all specific states ratify, specified states. So there will be a list of specific states, and those will be only when those ratify, that's when the entry into force will take place. Not until a specific number of states ratify. So you have several international agreements that say state a majority of countries or X amount of countries need to ratify in order for the entry into force, and or entry into force for each party as they ratify, as some international agreements have in them. We will wait. So far, 10 people voted, so we will let a little bit more people to vote. Okay, so it seems so far that we have a pretty extensive majority to not until a specific number of states ratify. And usually in the existing treaties, that is the provision of entry into force is a little bit more than half. So with that, if people want to continue to vote for that, you're more than welcome. I will conclude our session. I will thanks John very much for staying with us until 1 a.m. in the morning. And then we will send you a feedback for the event. So if both for getting what you thought about the event, as well as comments and suggestions, please take the survey. You can take it by clicking on the right side. You will see it in the chat box. There is a link for that. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, John. And we're looking forward for our next event that probably will take place in February, and we will keep you updated. It will be the launch of the timeline. A project that we have been working in order to create a hub that include all the main milestones that related to the weapon of mass destruction free zone history. So stay tuned. Thank you and good night, John.
Thank you. Good night. Good night, everybody. Bye.
Goodbye.